Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Luisa Tondelli, and I'm the scientific attaché here at the Embassy of Italy in London. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the 7th Science for Society event titled The Price of Technological Progress, organized by the Embassy of Italy in the United Kingdom in collaboration with Zadig, a scientific communication agency based in Italy, on the occasion of the 3rd Italian Research Day in the world. Unfortunately, one of our speakers, Roberto Cingolani, cannot be with us this evening due to an unforeseen situation in Italy. But we will have the pleasure to share the debate with Paolo Vineis, professor at Imperial College London, and Luca Carra, a scientific journalist from Science in Rete. Without further ado, I leave now the floor to the Ambassador of Italy to the United Kingdom, Raffaele Trombetta. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Luisa. I want to thank, of course, Paolo Vineis and Luca Carra, as well as, of course, our moderator, Luisa Tondelli, for joining us in this event. This is part of a series that the Embassy launched last year called Science for Society, which is, as I say, a series of events where we try to show the contribution of the Italian researchers to the international scientific efforts, but also to give a sort of platform where new ideas and also hopefully a new collaboration between the scientists of the two countries, UK and Italy, could meet. It also happens, this tonight's event, on the occasion of the Italian Research Day in the world, which is an initiative that the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs launched three years ago, precisely again with the purpose of highlighting the contribution of Italian researchers in the world, the contribution to the international scientific efforts. Of course, you know, the topic tonight is, and the title is, The Price of Technological Progress. And inevitably, I have to start in my few comments that I'd like to make. I have to start from COVID-19. It's inevitable, unfortunately, in our days to talk about this pandemic. COVID-19, in my view, did not come out of the blue. It's rather an accelerator of dynamics, of processes that were already happening in our society, in our world. In other words, it shows that it shows also the limits of the technological progress in tackling what, in fact, should have not been unexpected. So, from this point of view, the pandemic is a kind of wake up call. So, where the progress which we have experienced, and which has had a huge and positive impact on large part of our world. So where this process is leading us, and what we must do to prevent the problems generated, by the speed of the new technology, to prevent that those problems overweight the benefits that technological progress has given to our society. Where we will be focusing obviously on the increasing social, increasing inequalities. I remember when we had the G7 president in 2017, we were talking about inequalities. The contamination, let's say, of the social messages, contamination of cognitive capacity, and then the way that the balance, the environmental balance, has been altered in the last few decades. Recently, I personally I watched the latest David Attenborough documentary. It's an amazing, I have to say, it's a wonderful documentary that I really urge everyone to watch. And it's his testament, and he's quite brutal in showing the damages that have been caused to our planet. Some of them also by what we consider to be technological progress. But on the other hand, he has a very positive message at the end. He says that we are still in time, we can still do things. And this is the most important and most beautiful message that from someone can come from someone like David Attenborough. And I believe that more or less is the same message that our speakers, Paolo Vineis, Luca Carra, and also, of course, Roberto Cingolani, in their book, Prevenire, manifesto per una tecnopolitica. I think that's the same sort of message that they want to send us, with some proposals that I am looking forward to hearing tonight. So I want to thank again, our speakers, the moderator, and also all of you, all the participants that have decided to join us tonight. So thank you very much, and Luisa, back to you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Before going on, just a few technical points. For technical reasons, the audio and video connection of all the attendees are off, but they will be able to participate to the debate through the chat session, and that you probably find on the right part of your screen. Please submit your questions, and I will try to do my best to collect them at the end after the presentation of our speakers. For the same reason, of course, we ask all the panelists to mute themselves when not speaking. I have also to say that this event actually was scheduled at the beginning last April 15 at the Embassy of Italy in London in presence to celebrate together the Italian Research Day in the world, because April 15 is the anniversary of the birth of Leonardo da Vinci. And so this celebration takes place every year in many Italian diplomatic missions to highlight the contribution of Italian researchers around the world to international science, and also to promote the dissemination of the result of their activities. Of course, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, last spring we had to cancel the event, but we didn't want to lose this opportunity. And so I would really like to thank the speakers for having kept their promise of speaking at this postponed event today. So it's really a pleasure now to briefly introduce the speakers. Paolo Vineis is a chair in environmental epidemiology at Imperial College London, and also he has many other important duties, but I wanted to mention particularly that he's also vice president of the high-level advisory board for the Italian Ministry of Health. And Luca Carra, he's a scientific journalist and also director of Scienza in Rete, a scientific journal, an online scientific journal, very popular in Italy. Of course, as I already mentioned before, unfortunately, Roberto Cingolani cannot be with us tonight due to an unforeseen situation in Italy. They, together, Paolo, Luca, and Roberto, are also the author of the book Prevenire that the ambassador was mentioning in his introductory note. This book was published in Italy this January by Einaudi, so before the big COVID pandemic. And it's a book that I strongly recommend, and I also really look forward to seeing soon it published in English as well. But now I don't want to say anything more, so I leave the floor to Paolo and Luca for a conversation on what they have called the price of technological progress, or in Italian, tempo per prevenire. So thank you very much. Paolo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Luisa. Thank you, Ambassador. Well, in fact, the ambassador already introduced some of the themes of the book, as I will show. So I try to share my screen now. I hope you can see it. Yes, so the book was born from some conversations between the three people who are the authors of the book. We discovered just through informal conversations that there were analogies among the fields we are working in. And we decided to pursue, in a way, this the ideas beyond the conversations we had. And our trains of thought were converging towards the idea that humankind has several debts. We are used to talk about the economic debt of the nations, for example. We know now that there is a quite important environmental debt, including climate change, that might become irreversible. And there is a third type of debt, which is cognitive. And this was in a way new to us. And we tried to collect some evidence in favor of this idea that there is also cognitive debt related to the new communication technologies. So I start with COVID once again, because as Luisa said, and as the ambassador said as well, COVID has accelerated in a way several events and also drawn our attention to the planetary changes that are at the roots of certain diseases. So COVID is now a planetary problem, but it also has a planetary origin. It comes from events and changes which took place very far from Italy or the UK. And these changes can explain many other effects on health that have been neglected for a long time. So this is a slide from a paper by Fauci, Morris and Fauci, which shows the large number of re-emerging or newly emerging infectious diseases since 1981 until now. We see that there are quite a lot. And unevenly distributed in the world, in fact. And they can be explained by the several changes that took place at a planetary level. Well, essentially, COVID is a zoonotic disease. That is, it comes from animals. It comes from the interaction between animals, wild animals, intermediate species, and the human species. But it is also related to the biodiversity crisis and possibly to the climate crisis. Maybe COVID itself is not directly related to the climate crisis, but other zoonotic diseases, the diseases transmitted by animals are. So the question is, how can we avoid this kind of risks? How can we predict them? How can we prevent them? In general, how can improving planetary health both boost resilience to climate change and improve public health? This was one of the, I would say, discoveries in our conversations between a journalist, a technologist, Roberto Cingolani, and an epidemiologist like myself. So not only we found analogies and affinities among our fields, but we also found that there might be a common solution. Well, talking about solution is probably too ambitious. Nevertheless, we realized that by tackling one of the problems or some of the problems like climate change or biodiversity, We could also tackle problems related to human health. I think this is one of the red threads of the book. That is what we call co-benefits. The idea that not only planetary health and human health are interrelated, but also from a policy point of view, if you address one, you can also address the other. And I will try to show how. So in the book, we refer very much to this idea of planetary boundaries, which has been put forward by Rockström and others, and Stefan from the Stockholm Resilience Center. By the way, Rockström is one of the scientists behind Greta's political activity. He has inspired Greta. Rockström has been active, very active in the last 10 years or more, and he has coined this idea of the planetary boundaries. What does it mean? It means that the planet has 9 Earth systems or processes that are in a way essential for the functioning of the planet, and unmitigated changes to one or more of these systems or processes threatens what Rockström calls the safe operating space for humanity. Let's see what these boundaries are. As I said, they are 9. People have been talking a lot about some of them, like the ozone depletion in the past, climate change more recently, ocean acidification, also the phosphorus and nitrogen cycles, and the huge problem of phosphorus and nitrogen accumulation in the environment. Whereas not much has been said about genetic diversity. Genetic diversity, for example, among others, has not drawn as much attention as climate change. Well, it is usually difficult to say what is the problem number 1, to establish a kind of hierarchy across these problems. One could say freshwater use, maybe freshwater use at a level planetary scale is the problem number 1. Climate change, obviously, but now scientists are drawing everyone's attention towards genetic diversity, which is the loss of biodiversity. The loss of biodiversity is a reality. There has been a huge loss of biodiversity, as you see in the image above. And the image below refers to the abundance of vertebrates. So there is no doubt that loss of biodiversity occurs. There are different estimates. You have to consider that we don't know all the animal species or plant species on the planet. So these estimates are not necessarily a realistic picture of the situation. But in any case, it is clear that there has been a huge decline in the abundance of species. And people have provided projections for the future, which are the lines on the extreme right of the graph above. Well, some are more optimistic, others are less optimistic. And like all projections, also those of IPCC for climate change, they depend very much on strong assumptions. Where obviously the most pessimistic projections refer to business as usual. The others refer to, well, quick and energetic interventions to stop climate change or biodiversity. What we have not realized so far very clearly is that biodiversity is not, let's say, the loss of biodiversity is not a philosophical or aesthetic problem. It doesn't refer only to the fact that we are losing species, and that's bad in itself, but the loss of biodiversity has an impact on our health as well. In fact, one of the implications of the loss of biodiversity is the increased risk of epidemics and pandemics. Why? Because a variety of species exerts demographic control. In other words, the proliferation of a single species is not allowed due to the control exerted by other species, which means that there will be a dilution of viruses or bacteria or parasites among different species. It means that a certain species may be susceptible to viruses, for example, but another species will not be. Or another species may neutralize or block a certain virus. So biodiversity is a protective mechanism towards the proliferation of microbes, viruses, parasites, and so on. And also diversity within a single species is useful because it exerts a buffering effect. If you have a very homogeneous population within a certain species, it is more likely that if they are infected, they may become a reservoir for that virus, or as in the case of pigs, as we know, or chicken. Several animal breeding farms have become reservoirs for coronaviruses or H1N1. So these are examples of the fact that the planetary health also means health for humans in several ways. So I alluded at start that the conversations between the three of us raised several scientific issues. We found affinities among us, but we also discovered a potential way to address the problems we describe. Well, this is obviously not new. This was not invented by us, but in fact, we identified many fields in which this idea of the co-benefits applies. The policy of co-benefits has been coined at least at the Paris Agreement, but probably before, and now has become popular within the COP conferences, the conferences of the parties of the United Nations. And Luis alluded to, or the ambassador alluded to COP26, which will take place in Glasgow next year. It was postponed. It should have been on 2020. It will be next year. And it is co-organized by the UK and Italy. So it is particularly interesting for us. So what is a policy of co-benefits, which we believe is at the heart of climate action? It means that if you address one problem like climate change with mitigation measures, you can also have benefits for the population from the point of view of health. Or vice versa, if you address certain health issues, you can also have benefits for mitigation of climate change. A few examples. Now everyone knows that animal breeding to produce meat leads to the release of methane and a contribution to climate change through, sorry, I have a problem on the screen, through release of, as I said, of methane. But by reducing the intake of meat, you also have advantages for the human population in terms of health, because the excessive intake of meat leads to an increased risk of cardiovascular disease and certain types of cancer. This is quite interesting because it is probably more easy to sell to the population. I mean, measures that improve the health of the population are more easily understood because they are short-term compared to climate change, which is long-term. Many people are a little skeptical towards climate change as a problem because they think it is a long-term perspective. It doesn't necessarily concern me personally, whereas health is something that concerns everybody and in the short term. Another example is coal. Coal should be got rid of immediately because coal, the extraction and the use of coal for energy production is heavily polluting. In fact, the dose-response relationship between pollution from coal and human disease, particularly cardiovascular disease, is the steepest if you compare coal to other types of pollution, of air pollution. So if you get rid of coal, once again, you have several benefits, which are for the general population in terms of prevention of asthma, cardiovascular disease, lung cancer. Then for workers, because you can prevent minor diseases like pneumoconiosis. And once again, you can mitigate climate change. This is in a nutshell, the idea of co-benefits, which should be interesting for politicians, I believe. And that's why many people think that it should be at the center of COP26, because it is, in a way, it is easier to sell to the population. It is more understandable than acting for something that will take place in a long time from now. So,
if I can interrupt you for a moment, yes. We received the first question from Carlo Iacomini, mentioning the problem of desertification, soil degradation in general. That is another commonly neglected item, which is affecting and driving some of our worst scenario for future well-being. And Carlo said that soil biodiversity is not protected by any law and regulation, yet it provides most of the ecosystem services. And I want to add that, in fact, the theory of 9 planetary boundaries that you mentioned before by Johan Rockström mentioned also one of the boundary is precisely this one, the problem of soil consumption and degradation. And so, and this is obviously connected with the other aspects of the planetary health, such as climate change, biodiversity, and so on. Just this.
Yes. No, this is a very good comment because, as we know, desertification is at the roots of other huge problems like changes in agriculture, loss of arable land, and this in turn leads to wars. We know that several local wars, one of the first wars in Sudan, are related to desertification and loss of arable land. So I completely agree. And in terms of health, the loss of arable land is connected to, well, lack of food, increase in prices of food, but also poorer quality of food in terms of deficiency of micronutrients, vitamins, and so on. In fact, I've been working in Bangladesh for other reasons, on other themes related to climate change. And one of the problems there was exactly desertification in the north of Bangladesh, with lower access to food, and good quality food. I mean, with enough micronutrients and vitamins. So it's a very good comment. So if I can go on, I wanted to show this slide because it comes from a real piece of research we have done in a large European cohort on 500,000 people. We recruited starting in the early 90s. This study, which is called EPIC, is the equivalent of UK Biobank for those who know it. It is led by Imperial College, and we studied the health impacts of this study, this particular study, and we found that diet is related to several health outcomes like cardiovascular diseases or cancer, poor diet. And meat is one of the components of diet which increases the risk of those diseases. But in this particular study, we also looked at the planetary impact of different foods. And you see that on the left, meat is responsible, which is in yellow, for the greatest share of greenhouse gases emissions. And also the greatest share of loss of land use. Well, not loss of land use. The other extreme is represented by legumes. Legumes consume very little water. They do not contribute, if not very little, to greenhouse gases. And also their contribution to land use is very limited. So this does not mean to become all vegetarians or to only eat legumes, but it leads to a change in habits so that less meat is consumed in favor of vegetables and legumes, for reasons that are related to both health and planetary health. Now, I go back to COVID because, well, COVID has several lessons for us, and it is in a way a first introduction to what might happen in the future, not only because of pandemics or epidemics, but also because of the other threats we have mentioned and Rockstrom's planetary boundaries. COVID has brought with it certainly bad things, but also some good things, if you like, because it has raised awareness on the relationship between environment and health. And I think that now everybody knows about the role of bats, of animals, or wilderness, but also the role of international trades and international travels. And I think that in some way, because of COVID, maybe that populists have less arguments. I refer, for example, to negationists, the deniers. Yeah, the English word is deniers. It also prompted a relatively rapid response. Now, we hear a lot of complaints about the response to COVID, and I understand that, but we have to realize that the viral RNA has been sequenced very rapidly. Testing for antibodies or for RNA became very rapidly available. What usually took years, let's think of the preparation of a vaccine. Now we have at least 2 vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna. That took years to be developed, a vaccine against a new disease, many years. Now it has taken months. Well, I hope that one of the vaccines will be effective, but in any case, it is amazing how rapidly they have been developed. So also one of the lessons is that the response has been quicker in democratic countries by and large than in dictatorships or in populist regimes. Now, obviously, the borders between democracies and populist regimes is fuzzy. Sometimes it's not easy to classify different countries, but in any case, there is a relationship between the political characteristics of countries and the rapidity of response to COVID, with many exceptions. Sweden might be one. There are many bad things associated with COVID, like I would say the lack of international cooperation. Well, there has been international cooperation in the sense that, for example, RNA sequences were made available very quickly. And on the other side, the measures which have been taken differed from one nation to the other. So perhaps there has been scientific cooperation, but not so much political cooperation. And also within the single countries, my personal opinion is that there has been and still is too much emphasis on regionalism. And there is some confusion related to the conflict, let's say, between the central government and the regions. And also one of the bad things has been, I think, the weakening of WHO's authority, at least at a certain point. So among the lessons, I would mention a few things to avoid in the future. Nationalism, because one of the themes of the book is that there are no borders. I mean, pandemics have no borders. Pollution has no borders. For example, the whole of Europe is affected by pollution coming from coal plants from Eastern Europe. Then another thing to avoid is greed. And I'm a little concerned about the fact that some states buy most of the vaccine doses. Then there is an international initiative called COVAX, led by WHO, to which Italy participates, to share doses of the vaccine with low-income countries. But still, this is a problem. And also, sometimes we have seen the pursuit of exclusive economic interests, where we can discuss about the different policy actions for climate change. For example, the cap and trade strategy, which is strongly based on economic assumptions, seems to be insufficient to some people. We have to go beyond this kind of economic approaches to climate change. And now this is, as you see, Macron, and Luca, I think, will comment about this.
In the meanwhile, other questions arrive, but let me take advantage to this quotation from Macron, who has been interviewed by the magazine Le Grand Continent, and this interview was published also in excerpt by Corriere della Sera. And we chose this quotation because in some way resonates very much with our book. If you read through this text, you can acknowledge that the problems, the most important global problems for Macron are three. Inequalities, that we will be talking about that later, climate change, but also, in addition, another problem posed by social media and the internet. And said Macron, this remarkable creation, which was initially made to exchange knowledge and circulate it within an academic community, has become an extraordinary instrument for disseminating information. Nonetheless, it has also become two dangerous things, and an instrument for the viralization of emotions, but also the hierarchization of all self-expression, and therefore of objection to any form of authority. And at the end, Macron concludes his thought saying that this virtual space over-determines our choices today, and at the same time transform our political life, threatening also democracy. Well, this comment impressed us a lot, because Macron points out precisely the three debts that our book talks about: the environment, the social and economic debt, and what we have called in this book the cognitive or mental debt. Well, with this expression of mental debt, we wanted to point out a new condition that affects humankind, which consists in the risk that new communication technologies may deteriorate our reasoning skills. And in particular, in this part of the book, we summarized the literature about the changes in our life brought by the so-called infosphere. But what is the infosphere? Well, the infosphere is a dimension dominated by new digital communication technologies in which we spend most of our time. We are not only talking about the internet and social media, as Macron did, but also about digital applications, for instance, that simplify our everyday life. All this stuff helps us to live more comfortably and give us great opportunities to achieve an instant information and communication with other people. Nonetheless, the infosphere pushes us to live an on-life dimension, to use an expression coined by the philosopher of internet, Luciano Floridi, whereas the off-life dimension is our traditional way of life, the real, authentic life, as we can say. This gives us the possibility to have many contacts and live virtual rather than physical and material experiences. Take, for example, the most common social media like Facebook, internet, Instagram, and so on. Well, this gives us the illusion of having more friends, of being updated of many topics, and so on. And this is true. But at the same time, these devices are designed to enable us to interact only with people who have the same ideas as us, like-minded people in the so-called echo chambers. Well, what can be the consequences of this condition that we dealt with in this book? Well, in our book, we try to tackle this problem from two different angles. From a psychological and also social point of view, this system risks to reinforce our prejudices and elicits a higher degree of conformism or conformity. For instance, the reward mechanism that underlies these devices, such as the tool of like, for instance, for Facebook, can also create addiction and the need to stay connected as long as possible just to enjoy this kind of reward. And this problem is especially present in young people. And some studies shows, and we reported these studies in the book, that an excessive use of social media can develop real psychological disorders such as depression, anxiety, detachment from reality, and a sense of isolation when you're not online. Things, for example, of the fear of missing out syndrome. We have also some evidence that the increase in exposure to continuous information that our brain at the cortical level cannot absorb could worsen our mental faculties of self-awareness and even weakening our sense of identity. Then there is another angle that we can see, through which we can see this problem. From the political point of view, living for a long time in these echo chambers can create gated communities, as the philosopher and lawyer Cass Sustin said in his book Republic, that makes us more hostile to those who have opinions different from ours, and this can reduce our willingness to change our minds. In the most extreme cases, this can lead to polarization, the flourishing of conspiracy theories, and ultimately to the loss of also even to the pluralism and democracy. And these can become the ideal environment for the spread of fake news and disinformation, as in fact had happened during the pandemic with infodemic, this phenomenon of infodemic. Well, since in our book we tried to also to find out some solution, as we can see also later with Paolo, for this kind of debt, the mental debt, we propose that our societies must react to this communication ecosystem by implementing a kind of ecology of mind. And we borrow the title of the book written by the anthropologist Gregory Bateson, Toward the Ecology of Mind. This can only happen if we are able to question these forms of communication and to try to design new technologies more open and to a more diverse and plural environment. In conclusion, in this chapter, we can say that in analogy with what was said before, also for the infosphere, as Paolo said for the biosphere, the challenge at the end is to increase the level of biodiversity or the infodiversity of our digital communication. So we face the same problem with the ecosystem and with this artificial ecosystem, the ecosystem of communication. So that's for the moment it's all for this mental debt. That is one of the three main problems that we face, that we treat in our book. And so I will give again the floor to Paolo, and I want to...
May I just
yes.
comment on this? Paolo, I don't know if you have some other slide to present. We have still 10 minutes left. So, and there are also a couple of questions. What do you prefer?
Well, if you like, I show 2 or 3 slides just about inequalities, and then we still have some time for questions. Well, very briefly, as Luca said, we are tackling 3 types of debt. I spoke about the environmental and planetary debt. Luca spoke about the cognitive and mental debt. And the third is inequalities, the economic debt. Well, usually people talk about economic debt thinking of the nation's debts. But in fact, there is a deeper kind of debt, which is inequalities. Social and economic inequalities, and we consider this aspect in the book from several angles, including the life course angle, because well, both Luca and myself have taken part in Horizon 2020 project funded by the European Commission that was exactly about the life course implications of disparities or low socioeconomic profiles. one of the assumptions of that research, and this is one of the chapters in the book, was that there are divergent paths in life, starting from conception, in fact, depending on socioeconomic position of the people. So this was already, in a way, intuitive in the past. This is a poster from a long time ago. So depending on the earning of these people at different ages, they have a different kind of trajectory in life, and a decline in one case and a flourishing on the other case. And this can be shown with current research. And in fact, our project, LifePath, was exactly on what we call the embodiment of social disparities. That is how social disparities affect the biology of people, the body. And we did it in several ways. This is the example of the life course trajectory. This is in particular a group of Finnish children who were recruited at birth, and then they were followed up until the age of 55. And what we observed was that there was a huge divide from scratch, from an early age, in terms of risk factors. In blue, you see the higher socioeconomic status, in red, the lower. You see that already after birth, people belonging to a low socioeconomic status consume less vegetables and fruit. They do less physical activity. They have a higher BMI, body mass index, so they have a propensity to obesity. They smoke earlier, and so on. And when they come to the age of 25 or around 25, they start having higher cholesterol, higher triglycerides, and then we follow them up until the age of 55, and we observed a higher risk of cardiovascular disease and diabetes. So that's for the life course trajectory. And then we also looked at,
Well, we have a lot of difficult questions to answer to.
Okay, all right.
If you want,
well, I
can...
just the final thing. I don't have any other slide, but the final thing is that we demonstrated that these socioeconomic disparities leave an imprinting on the biology, and we studied a number of biomarkers, including epigenetics, but obviously there is not time to talk about that. So I leave the floor to Louise, I guess, for the questions.
Yes, thank you very much. Really very interesting and fascinating comments. But I also have a couple of questions for you from the audience. The first one from Roberto Buizza. He says, the lack of preparation to face the second wave of COVID is a clear indication of the fact that politicians and decision makers do not use and trust predictions, which is actually what we see in climate change. So the question is, how can we change this? And how, as scientists, can we make sure that predictions are used and trust more in decision-making process? The other one is much more related to the important link between food and the environment, because also here, Marisa Papaluca says, often the links between health and food policies are forgotten. So there is a gap to be mentioned in future policies in order to further support cost-effective solution, both for the environment and health. So will this topic be taken into account for the future conference next year? And then there are some congratulations, but this is for the end of the conference. Who wants to give a feedback?
Luca, do you mind if I answer the first question?
Yes, of course.
On prediction, yes. The question comes from Roberto Buizza, who is a famous meteorologist. who is used to make prediction models for meteorology. And well, I will answer very bluntly, I would say, because I had an experience in the so-called unit of crisis in my region. And it is true that people didn't believe in a second wave. In fact, I wrote a report for the unit of crisis in July, where I said, look, we will most likely have a second wave in October. But this was not taken seriously, frankly. So there was no preparedness for the first wave and very little preparedness for the second one. Having said that, we also have to consider that our National Health Service has not been structured for, well, I'm talking about Italy, but the same applies to the UK. It's not structured for this kind of sudden events, unexpected events. We obviously agree that COVID has been exceptional. So the problem of the national health or the regional health systems in Italy is that they're very stiff. They're used to deal with an epidemiology of diseases which is quite stable, like chronic diseases, cancer, cardiovascular diseases, and they have guidelines to tackle this kind of diseases. COVID was unexpected, was abrupt, and so there is some justification, but certainly we cannot be prepared to the third wave. And this is my current, I would say, discussion and conflict also with the health authorities in my region, because they are talking about closures, lockdowns, the classification of regions in terms of the color, red, orange, or green. But they're not talking about the next month. What are we preparing to the next month? I stop there. And
if I may add something, I think that actually we are unprepared also for the chronic events, not only for the emergencies, because also in terms of climate change and so on, we have some problem. I think that maybe we can try to create a stronger relation between science and policy and institutions in Italy. At least in United Kingdom, you have some tradition of scientific advice. Also in the parliament, there is the Parliamentary Office for Science and Technology. We don't have any office of this kind in Italy, and that's why last year a group of scientific journalists and researchers launched this initiative of Scienza in Parlamento to create a similar office in serving the Italian Parliament, because I think it is very important to strengthen this relation, to make policymakers used to the possibility to use scientific evidence and to get accustomed to evidence-based policy. And I don't know, Paolo, if you agree with this perspective.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
There was a second question related to the connection between the connection between food and health. Is there somebody who want to answer to this, or?
Well, I can just mention that there are several initiatives now. The first one was the Lancet Eat Commission, which was a commission set up a few years ago that produced a very influential paper that came out in the Lancet, the journal, the Lancet last year, which is a diet for the Anthropocene. That is how to build a diet or dietary recommendations that tackle both planetary health and human health. That was one example. Now the new Horizon 2020 call for grants, it has a section which is called Farm to Fork, and it is all about this problem of considering jointly the planetary impact of different eating styles, food systems, and the health impact. So much work is going to be done thanks to the European funding.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I think we are nearing the end of the webinar. I do believe that it has been a very fruitful and rich discussion where you addressed many important issues that our attendees will be able to deepen reading the book Prevenire that you wrote together also with Roberto Cingolani. I also would like to thank all the attendees for their participation. Thank you for your questions. Thank you also for your comments, suggestions for future events as well, which are also very appreciated. And also I have to say for the congratulations for the speakers for their presentation today. I would also like to thank the collaboration with Zadig because the webinar has been recorded, so everybody will be able to see it again in the next days on our website and social networks. On the website of the Embassy of Italy in the United Kingdom, you will also find not only the link to this event, but the link to previous event and the information about the future webinar we are preparing for next year. So last but not least, I wanted to thanks a lot Paolo Vineis, Luca Carra, and let's say also Roberto Cingolani, because I'm sure that he would have been very happy to be with us tonight as well. Thank you for your time and for your availability. Also for your patience, because we have tried to schedule this event several times in the last months. Thank you for having shared with us your opinion and also for the recommendation for what we hope will be and we trust will be a more sustainable future. Thanks to everybody. Good evening. Take care and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.